Welcome back. You're still watching European Closing Bell. I'm Louisa Boyson. Australia's government has promised to climb out of the red and return to budget surplus in 2012 to 2013. Treasurer Wayne Swan announced the country's biggest package of savings in 30 years, which includes cuts in defence spending and cancelling tax cuts for companies. The forecast surplus will be delivered just ahead of elections next year, but it comes as many sectors warn of weak demand, and they've urged policymakers to do more about the strong Aussie dollar. Tim Harcourt, he is Professor of Economics at the Australian School of Business at the University of New South Wales. And you just flew through London. And
just to be with you.
Just to be with us.
Exactly. Here
Absolutely amazing.
Cool.
So I'm looking at a piece of research from a SocGen analyst essentially saying that Australia is heading for the mother of all hard landings, regardless of whether or not
we're from. SocGen.
This is SocGen.
Oh, they would say that, wouldn't they? Yeah. Look, you know, there's a lot of talk since I've arrived in Europe about austerity and so on. This was a budget for prosperity, not austerity. I mean, Australia's had 21 years without a recession. We've got a great situation where a lot of demand for everything that we provide from China, India, Brazil, Middle East, Africa is doing well. And basically, we've had a very good fiscal situation. And most things are going well, except, you know, making sure there's not capacity constraints in the future.
I go on to quote the research.
Yeah, keep going.
And Edwards, Mr. Edwards, the strategist from Societe Generale, is quoted as saying that in Australia we see a credit bubble built on a commodity bull market based on a much bigger Chinese credit bubble.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, because a lot of the global imbalances in the world were the fact that China had too many shippers and not enough shoppers, and the United States were the other way around. They had too many shoppers and not enough shippers. And eventually China knew it had to move towards more domestic consumption and investment. And to do that, of course, that causes demand in terms of architecture and infrastructure construction to a lot of the Western China cities, the second and third tier cities. So I actually think there's strong fundamentals there that are driving our demand and therefore the strength of our economy.
What do you think, John?
It's quite hard to understand why somebody would be depressed. You've got reasonable prospects of sort of 3% growth, 3% inflation, minor surplus. The debt was, by historic standards, it's high for the total economy, still way south of anything we get in Europe. You're about sort of half the UK at total debt load for the economy.
Sure.
And your government debt's actually remarkably slight.
6% of GDP, it's nothing.
Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, in many ways, you know, to get a run, you've got to look for some faults. I mean, I'd say that there are important long-term structural issues in Australia. Great demand from China and India, so we're going to have to build up the capacity to take a walk on the supply side. That's why the government put a lot of money into infrastructure. I think that's a good idea. And also the ageing of the population will matter.
But you talk about, I mean, the surplus, but at the same time, was it last week? My memory escapes me now.
No, you're right.
Where we saw the RBS cutting rates by 50 basis points.
Bank, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Huge surprise. I mean, caught many of us by surprise.
Not to the markets. I mean, to some extent, the move was anticipating because of, you know, my big fat Greek debt and the slowing in Europe and all these things. But the government had already signalled that it was going to take the budget into surplus. I mean, it's a political economy question. I mean, basically, governments of the left, wherever they are, have to run a tighter fiscal policy to get re-elected, whether you're a Democrat in America or Labor Party in Australia, regardless of how well they do in the past. I mean, the Labor government did very well with the GFC in 2008. The Hawke-Keating governments did very, very well fiscally when they were in government for a long time. But there's just a political economy question that the government needs to meet.
Economy looks in rude health compared to most of Europe.
Well, it's amazing. I'm amazed that here in Britain, the Liberal Democrats, you know, effectively the party of John Maynard Keynes, having to sign up to all this austerity stuff when the rest of Europe seems to be making quite a big change. That must be politically really diabolical for them.
Now you see, you are definitely the wrong country. We don't have an austerity package in the UK. We merely say we have an austerity
package. We talk austerity.
So our spending is going up steadily. There is no growth. The UK does not have an austerity package. Not like Greece, not like Ireland. We don't have one.
That's even
worse.
We
merely talk about it.
Talking about it's worse than doing it, isn't it?
Well, talking about it's just bad for the mood of the people, but it doesn't achieve anything, of course. So the debt keeps on rising, the deficit keeps on rolling along.
Yeah. While in the case of Australia, they have done very targeted spending cuts, which they had to. But overall, it's, as you say, a prosperity package, not an austerity one.
Tim, yeah, sorry, when you're heading to the grocery store again to buy milk, come by the UK via Australia and come visit us again. So,
it'd be my pleasure.
Just around the corner. Tim Harcourt joining us, Professor of Economics from the Australian School of Business at the University of New South Wales. The head of Germany's central bank